Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk Podcast, where we discuss the convergence of technology, business productivity, and collaboration culture. Always so much around the culture. My guest today is Ryan Chute, an entrepreneur, marketer, and partner with Wizard of Ads, based in Austin, Texas, and other places. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thank you so much, Christian. Great to be here.
And I know you're out on the road too. It's always exciting to be out on the road working from a laptop, uh, uh, getting interviewed.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm all over the place. Today I'm in my offices in Phoenix, Arizona at Fix It Frankie, which is a home service company that we run. And I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. So I'm bouncing all around, and my clients are mostly in the United States, but a little bit in Canada, and I've got a few overseas in Ireland as well, and occasionally go over to Australia and New Zealand.
Very exciting stuff. Yeah, it's I always I used to be better at keeping up with the weather patterns on world travels, and it used to be I would travel a lot more. I think like a lot of us pre-pandemic, I was on the road a lot more than I
Yeah,
am now. I was a 3 or 4 event a month guy for years,
yeah,
and so now it's 5 or 6 events in a year, and it's nice. I
yeah.
miss aspects of that, but
There's always good and bad
yeah.
in those things. You gotta choose your poison.
Well, there's nothing more exciting than going to the airport in a winter coat because it's snowing and then get down to like Australia, New Zealand and realize that you overpacked for
Yes.
colder weather.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is a fun topic. Should be a great conversation here. We're talking today about removing friction, how persuasive communication builds stronger brands and happier teams. And so on this topic, why don't we just jump right in? So how would you define? I know as a marketer, as a business person, as an investor, how would you define persuasive communication, especially as it applies in the workspace?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of people get kind of muddled up with persuasion, influence, authority, power, leadership, all of these buzzwords that all tend to mean too many things in a lot of cases. And really, the very first step of persuasion in any case is to agree on a definition of terms. And for me, persuasion really starts with the psychology and biology of motivation, right? There's these 10 major kind of functional elements that I've boiled it down to in my frameworks to keep it really simple to start with. Is it complicated? Incredibly complicated. Does it need to be to function, to cope, to be a good leader, to do the things that are right for people? No, it can be a lot easier. And when we understand the basic ingredients, we can really just start building a better mechanism, for exponential profitable growth.
When you go in and working with an organization, say you take on a new client and you're helping them with, messaging and positioning
Mhm.
and strategy and kind of all the other things that you talk to them about. I mean, what's typically the state of their internal and their external communication? Is it something that is it common to find an organization that has got it together and has a communication framework or methodology in place, or is that something that you're constantly having to build and train them?
That is the kind of the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? And the reality of it is that most of the organizations I go into, and I've gone into thousands of them, uh, they don't they're well-intentioned human beings, usually ambitious, usually driving towards a big ambitious goal, and struggling. They're hitting ceilings. They're hitting these invisible, ceilings of why they can't grow, why they can't push past a certain level. And some of it has to do with external communications and being better marketing. But a lot of the time, that marketing is um, um, stifled by what's going on operationally inside their business. A partner of mine, Ray Sagrin, at Wizard of Ads, he's the one who really introduced this concept to me of brand and culture and experience. And when you have culture at the forefront of your um, strategy. That culture is about how we're framing the communication for our employees to make their lives easier, to make it easier for sellers to sell and easier for buyers to buy, for the HR department to do what they need to do, for the compensation to complement what we intend it to do, and to motivate the people to do the things that we want it to do, and every other aspect of the frictionless framework, of which there's 12 major components. And that culture is really what informs the buying experience. As customers go through the buying experience, it's really valuable to have that um, employee experience locked up and figured out. When we have a great employee experience and we have a great buying experience, that's what we talk about in our advertising. That is what your brand is. So ultimately, it all boils back to your brand is your culture, and your culture is your brand. And when we get that right, internal or external communications just become communications.
Maybe this is like a broader question, because I completely agree with what you said. I mean, I mean, culture is that conversation I've had with almost every company I've worked with, and worked for, and there are, but again, there's very few of those companies that actually like acknowledge that it's the culture, talk about their culture and what they want to do around the culture. I worked with a client that was a very fast growing company about 20 years ago. That's all they would talk. It was actually in their marketing, their branding, about how fabulous their culture was. And part of the problem is that the marketing for the company is around their culture. Um, it was true in the beginning, and they moved away from it. And they where they struggled is because they wouldn't recognize that they had moved away from the culture, the style, but just things had
Absolutely
changed. It
huge.
didn't evolve. So they when they were 30 people, they created that and it scaled up to a couple hundred people, but then they never adjusted for that.
Right. And that really is something that you do see when you do see those high scale companies in the early days in particular. A 200-person culture is very, very different than a 30-person culture, and you do have to continue to uh, block and tackle. You have to continue to change. You have to continue to adapt. One of the 12 major friction points is around what most people like to call change management, which I reject completely and lean
Mm,
into change leadership, because
yeah,
managing a task change is simple. That's actually very just functional. Managing human change is incredibly difficult and requires a considerably more durable process that we pay attention to, because it's the people that are the ones who are actually going to do it or not do it, and allow us to grow or not grow. So people are the wild card, right? So
yeah.
as soon as you've got all of these 12 components done, you've got to go back and do them all again, and then do them again and again and again as more people, processes, policy, structures get into place. That culture changes. And I think a lot of people miss the fact that there's not just one culture in your business. That there's neighborhoods of cultures in your business, and you either have the opportunity to influence and positively affect your culture, or you have the opportunity to um, watch it turn toxic. And ultimately, um, you can't control your culture. Your employees do, but you can certainly influence your culture by your intentions and paying attention to the things that are causing friction in your business, because that friction causes resistance, and the resistance creates an environment where the bosses have to either go for compliance or for motivation or influence. And when we can get past the notion of compliance, we can create a safe, healthy atmosphere where people can thrive, and all of that feeds the opportunity to profitably grow.
One of the things that I talk about a lot. So I'm a information management collaboration guy. I'm in the governance space, and a
Yes.
lot of what I talk about is kind of exactly what you said. Is that like you can't. I always call it, you can't manage by spreadsheet. companies, people will go and say, well, just give me the checklist of things to do for governance. Like it's not a checklist. It's not a document like, oh, we've done these things. Okay, we're well governed. We're done. Like, no, it's a continual process that
Right.
you go back and you relook at that. And so as part of that, I always say that you need to have a methodology. So have your framework, have those guardrails, but have that process. And the process you'll adjust, but you follow that process.
Right.
And it's something to make sure that you're asking the right questions every time, so that you're consistent across projects, around initiatives, around messaging that goes internal or external, kind of all those things. And I
Right.
always say, I don't care what your methodology is, just have a methodology.
Right.
Maybe you could expand, like when you talk about your 12 points of friction and in your methodology. So what is the model that you use with your clients?
Well, when it gets into the friction components, there's think of your business like HubSpot CEO talked about as a flywheel, right? We have this thing that can either run smoothly or not, and flywheels exist in things like brakes on our car, and part of an effective flywheel is that sometimes friction is necessary like stop your car from crashing and slowing down in front of that car in
Little
front of you.
things, yes.
Right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, and ultimately, there are times when friction is absolutely necessary. The very last chapter of the book that's being written today is about when friction matters and in that process. And it really comes down into four kind of big buckets, and sorry, three big buckets that each have four different things on them. The first is mastering the motivation and really having people understand the ingredients of motivation, because when people understand how to motivate people, that was one of the biggest struggles I had, was that I just didn't know how to motivate people. The idea was there, and the all of the uh, attributes and traits and nice feeling talk and words were being used, but there was no understanding of what constituent components could I string together with a golden thread to make it a motivating atmosphere. And that led me down that path. And then we get into this mindset thing. I mean, everyone talks about mindset, but it's all very vague and gray. So we need to get that mindset really locked in with a mentality of a thriving mindset. If we have staff, if we have customers, if we have our kids or our wife who's in this survival mode thinking, we're not going to motivate them out of survival thinking. We need to meet them where they're at, and that's really the crux of this thriving framework, is to move them along with you up to a spot where they are also acting in an abundant, grateful, thriving atmosphere, less driven by ego and a hoarding of resources and protectionism. And then we can move into empowering people, because we're all singing off the same song sheet. And when we're empowering people, they have that opportunity to uh, act without having to go check with their boss, and the boss can trust them, creating a further healthy atmosphere. So there's a whole framework around empowering, and that focuses around the mastering aspects. When we are in a spot where we can allow people to master their craft, that's a big part of motivation that far exceeds how much money people get paid once you get past kind of the baseline of what people hope to receive as an income. And that's phase one. As we move into phase two, we really start to talk about our people, right? And the structure of the business. And in that structure, we have to focus on who we're going to recruit, how we're going to recruit them, and then how we're going to bring them through the process to onboard them to be congruent with our value systems and our belief structures. How we're going to structure the business so that we are giving the people the space and the freedom to do the things that they need to do without burdening them with low level tasks for higher level individuals, or vice versa, expecting an entry level position to make a manager level decision. Uh, then we look at how we measure things. And the way we measure things is very often a huge point of friction. Uh, we very often are using KPIs as the measurement tool when those are really just the indicator of whether or not we've done the action and behaviors necessary to meet or exceed the goals. When we adjust our thinking around how we measure and what those measurements actually tell us, both responsible are the employee for doing the thing, but also the leaders for supplying all of the resources and means for them to succeed. So we're taking a responsibility as leaders to help and serve our people at the highest level. And again, these are all of the same blind spots that I see in all of these businesses all the time. And it's all well intended, but causing friction that you don't realize is there. And that friction is like a rust, right? Or a bump or a misaligned part on a friction flywheel or a flywheel in general. And when we start to recognize that there are things causing friction and that friction's causing resistance, we can make adjustments and make those tweaks and sand down the rust and get rid of the rub points, um, grease the wheel, as they say, and find ways to accelerate that profitable growth. Because now you're going to have better productivity. You're going to have happier people, healthier people, both mentally and physically, and people who feel abundant in their nature, that wealthy aspect of a culture. Last but not least is the delivering of delight. And in this section, after we've created a business that is running smoothly and is focused on motivating people. So we've started with people and our mindset, and then put a structure in place that makes it easy for them to do their jobs. We then need to go ahead and communicate externally with our marketing. Um, One of the big ways that we do that, Christian, is to curate our inventory. When we curate the inventory of our products, of our protections, of our pricing, of our payments, even, it allows for a journey to be made. Now, most companies I've gone into, they don't curate anything. It's just like, here's 1,000 different things you can sell. Go forth and prosper. Good luck. When you start to piece these together in these very elegant ways, you can find huge opportunities to persuasively communicate your solutions from a simple to a more complex solution, from a lower cost to a higher cost solution, without the customer or the employee feeling as though there's something awry, there's something unappealing. Once that inventory and that product is and the pricing has been curated, selling becomes infinitely easier. And I've literally been able to take a 6 to 8 step typical sales process that you hear from basically everybody down to 3 simple steps. And when you get into a 3 step sales process, you really do start to accelerate the buying cycle, because you can make it easier for people to buy by making it easier for your sellers to sell. But that's not where we end. Where we end is in the most crucial part that gets missed in basically every business. Some have picked this up and gotten really, really good at this, and that's delivering delight. When we build a system, uh, um, a product or a service, a solution that meets the expectation, is a wonderful product, is a wonderful solution, wonderful service, uh, that's not where we should stop. Right? What we should do is operationally bake in a little bit more than what we promised, and keep it a secret and reveal it as a delight factor. Now, this is true for what we do for our employees and how we compensate them, as much as it is for our customers or our wives or our kids, right? All of these things allow us to generate a, a biological function that is different than what we're anticipating. If I say, we're going to give you everything in the kitchen sink and you should expect exceptional service, you're like, okay, my minimum standard is now everything in the kitchen sink and exceptional service. But if I said, we're gonna do the thing that we say that we're going to do on time and on budget, we're going to treat you fairly, and we do exactly that, and then we give you the kitchen sink, right? Afterwards, and say, "Oh, by the way, here's this free kitchen sink as part of the deal," right? Then the
Mhm.
customer shoots a little molecule in their bodies called oxytocin. And that oxytocin says love, bond, loyalty, 5-star reviews, unsolicited referrals, repeat purchases, right? That affinity towards you. The whole branding exercise is far more about bonding than it is about delivering an expectation or a satisfaction that only dopamine can get. Most people think
Mhm.
that dopamine is about feeling happy and feeling good. Dopamine is about the anticipation of feeling good. If we just fire the dopamine receptors, we're not actually getting anyone to feel bonded to us, loyal to us, and have long-term feelings about us. It's oxytocin that does that. And that's the levers that we're looking to pull in this whole process. That's where persuasive communication comes from. That's where influence lives, is in the biology of the human.
You've covered a lot of areas of, talking about, like one from, onboarding of new employees and adding them into, the culture of the organization, the life cycle of the of the culture of the organization itself, how you communicate internally, and then there's the external factor of that. A lot of
Right.
what I do with my clients, I'm focusing on helping them with the external factors.
Yeah.
I talk about change management, to your point. Like, I get your point about change leadership. You're trying to change that model. But a big part of that, and how I was kind of interpreting, some of what you were uh, um, outlining, but is doing like the persona development and the customer journeys of actually understanding your target customers, your 2 to 4 actual target customers, and understanding their needs, and the differences between those personas is so critical to that communication. But it's the same with employees. If I'm talking just blankly staring at the back of the hall, talking to 100 people, versus it's a very different communication style. It's much more of a persuasive style when I'm doing a one-on-one, where I'm trying to understand the background, what's going on in the life of this employee or this peer, and having a conversation, trying to win them over to where I need their help, and this is what's going on, and having that conversation. you can you'll have much more persuasive communication when you understand their motivations. You understand, again, from a persona marketing standpoint, you understand the nuances of their needs, their wants, their pain points, those things, which is exactly the same when dealing with people inside the employees inside the organization. You're going to be more persuasive. You're going to change more minds and move people, motivate people, when you have a connection there, versus just smart marketing copy. I wrote a nice little quip in this email and pushed it out to a broad list.
Persona marketing and creating customer persona and employee personas are all valuable sometimes. In some industries, there is absolutely very specific needs and possibly a divergence of needs for different customer groups, segmentation groups. But I'm talking about something even simpler than that. The thing that I learned as I traveled around for the last 15 years, all across the world. I've been on 4 continents and 10 or 12 different countries now, doing this. And what I've discovered is that while economies and cultures change, that psychology and biology doesn't. And when we can take motivation down to its 10 most rudimentary parts, understanding that identity is the primary driver of all motivations, external or internal, positive or negative, that what we're actually motivating is the human spirit, the human soul, male or female, young or old, in between, that when we get back to first principles of the biology and psychology of human beings, that we can move people in an elegant way based on how they want to be treated. It's like shifting past the golden rule, which is do unto others as you want to be done unto, to the platinum rule, which is to do unto others as others want to be done unto. And when we move to how people want to be treated based off of the information and feedback that they give us, and then provide them with the easiest path to move forward with us in whatever that looks like, be it as an employee, as our wife, as our children, our next door
Mhm.
neighbor who's maybe a bit of a pain in the butt, or that other next door neighbor who's wonderful and mows your grass for you. Um, all of these different scenarios all have a complexity to them that are simplified by just understanding the most basic of ingredients. And when we understand that, now we can cope, as leaders, as bosses, as employees, as daughters and sons and husbands and wives and children, because now we have this understanding, this foundational understanding of that's why that person is likely doing it, and this is how I can respond to it, and this is how I can actually get people to do things, um, not through manipulation or malpractice, but through good intentions and serving people where they want to be served.
Hmm. Yeah, it just reminds me a lot. I did a leadership development program about 15 years ago that was started by uh, friends from high school that had one and gone the psychology route and into technology and was
Mhm.
working as a project manager for Boeing doing massive projects. The other
Yep.
one went the psychiatry, actually got the medical practice, that side of it, but both deeply rooted in that aspect. And they started a leadership development program called Pathwise Leadership, which I went through one of the early cohorts and a year-long program for that. But at the core of that was something like you don't have to agree with the like Freudian personality types, which are all very dark and depressing sounding and things around that. But the fundamental of that is that look, we all have like leading personality traits, and it's being able to understand your own personality, your style, how you react to things, which is the hardest part of the entire thing is to look inward and understand, here there are certain things where words are said or certain personality types that trigger me, make me angry without even like there's no reason to be angry. It's just something that's kind of, innate in my personality style. What I can start to recognize, I understand that about myself and I'm able to start to recognize as I meet with people, talk with them, their personality profile,
Yep.
then to know, okay, my style, understanding their style, how do these best match up? So it's like an intentional looking at even somebody, and you could do this with people that you like, in your work life, there you're occasionally going to work with people that you cannot stand. You would never invite them home for dinner.
Mm.
You still have to work with them, get along with them, do things with them, and you can find I think that's probably everybody has that experience where,
Yeah.
like, I have no choice, I have to work with this person. So you've almost reached that same conclusion of, we found a way that, I can communicate effectively, we understand that, and then that's it, and we just need to do that for everyone that we work with, not just those
Yeah.
people that we struggle with.
Yeah. No,
But I
good
honestly, I
point.
think that is the only time that we intentionally go and look at that, like, how do I make this work?
Right.
Yet, even people that we really like, we should think about it in a similar pattern to identify, okay, yeah, we could end up spending more time chatting about family and music and other things and not get work done. Well, okay, that's an indicator that you need to find what is the right mixture and the right way for you to communicate and work together.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
I I,
that's a
I
hard
agree.
skill.
Yeah, I agree. And uh, y- I read this excruciatingly difficult book to read from James Schuler called "The Three Levels of Leadership," and it took me down a path that had me matching things up from a variety of different disciplines. And the crux of it is people are either living in survival mode or in thriving mode. And most people who live in thriving mode don't even realize they may realize that there's a universe above where they're at, but they don't believe that it's a real thing that they can attain, right? And this likens to the hierarchy of Maslow, right? Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and
Mhm.
you start to look at that in correlation to trying to think of David's last name, but his book around tribal leadership, and Jim Collins' book around the five levels of leadership. And
Yep.
this had me come up with my own theory, my own hypothesis around survival and thriving mode. And survival is no different than in the hierarchy of needs with Abraham Maslow. We have the subsistence and basic needs, and it moves up to survival needs. When you look at it through the lens of tribal leadership, you start to see that there's like basically a collection of people, and then it turns into more of a cartel in a lot of ways. Warlords live in survival mode, and there's usually bad bosses and all of those other things in those
Mhm.
same realms. Um, all of this translates into the thing that Abraham Maslow says himself, that 65% of people are trying to get into belonging mode or retain belonging mode, or that third level in the hierarchy, for most of their lives. And when they do have that ability to get there, that's really in my perspective, that's the keeping up with the Joneses kind of spot. This is where individualistically we are absolutely keeping up with the Joneses. We've got the nicer car, and that we're prospering, but we're doing it in a very individualistic way. All of this to be said, that breaks up into three big buckets. One is the self. Where are we at on this hierarchy as individuals, subconsciously and consciously? Then where are the people that we're directly influencing at? Our kids, our wives, our coworkers, our boss. And then thirdly, what is the greater group at within the context of the tribe that we're in at that moment, be it the work tribe, the home tribe, the church tribe that we're looking at. Those are your three big buckets: the self, the individual, and the tribe. Within that, there is survival and thriving. Agreeing that thriving really is just level 3, and that we're not even going to talk about levels 4 and 5 just yet. Where do we meet these people? Well, if they're surviving, if they're feeling like circle the wagons and shut the doors of the fort, and hoard the resources and protect everything, we're not going to coax them out of their fort with with a nice dinner, right? We're going to have to get in there with them and collaborate with them and feel with them and connect with them, because until we do, they're not going to buy into any of our abundant nonsense, right? Because that's their perspective, and respectfully so. When we start to recognize that, what we're really recognizing here out of all of the stuff that I just said is we need to know where we're at to be able to influence and persuade people where they're at. We're going to do that by meeting them where they're at, regardless of where we're at, and leaning into and stepping over that. So we really just have to kind of think about it in two buckets. Is it surviving? Is it thriving? If it is, how can I um, appeal to them where they are right now in their mindset?
Do you look at that separation between those two modes? Is it like can you have for people who are in that you know that survival mentality? I mean, a lot of times the only way I'm just thinking, personally, unless there's like an emotional appeal, I'm not going to get them to move. They're so focused on, getting through the day, getting through the set of tasks. Where people are more structured, and I would say, they're doing well, they're thriving in that role. Then you can have more of that, logical approach with your communication.
It's
Uh,
actually
eh,
it's more emotional than you might expect, Christian. And what it is that is that transactional versus relational thinking. Survival mode is very transactional. It is an
Mhm.
exchange of things and a hoarding of resources and a protection of to survive. It's a survival mechanism. It's a very humanistic thing. There's nothing abnormal about it. So if they're acting transactional about a particular type of purchase or about doing the dishes at night with with you or the kids, or how you exchange or communicate with your next door neighbor in these things, there is the potential of that being transactional, and that's an indicator for you. That's the signal that says this is probably transactional in nature. This is transactional. This is survival in nature. This is potentially being spurred on by the ego, and we need to recognize that in those situations we're going to have to meet them there. If they're acting abundantly, if they're acting generous, if they're acting with graciousness and humility, and they've abandoned the ego back in survival mode, and there's an abundance that they show. This isn't about being rich or poor. This is about what our mindset is in the moment and for the different exchanges, because we all have transactional and relational mindsets at work. When the boss yells at you, you immediately turn into like, screw this guy, I'm not going to do anything he says. It turns transactional, right? um, if,
Mhm.
if if the praise feels disingenuous, even if it isn't, it's like, nah, that was just no, I'm out. Right? And now they're moving on to the thing that becomes less relational. So we're constantly ebbing and flowing between this survival mode and thriving mode, but that all lives in this relational versus um, transactional nature. And we all have both of those things in us all the time, about different things at different times. If we got yelled at, before we got to work that day by the missus, and probably for a good reason, at least it is with me, um, then then I'm going to have a different mood and tone, with the way that I approach things. Um,
Yep.
if in the sales process somebody looks at it and goes, you're being a little sleazy, you're not showing me empathy or competence in some way, I'm not going to trust you. I'm going to go back to a transactional nature, and I'm probably not buying from you. So when we just break it down into these two simple buckets, now we have the ability to just kind of live in these buckets. And where this comes from is weird. It comes from creativity. When you create a creative constraint on a writer or an artist, it actually becomes more potent for the artist in a lot of ways. When I say draw anything, somebody goes, "Oh, okay, well, I don't know what I'm going to draw," right? But if I say draw the best darn pink elephant you could ever draw, the artist goes, "Hold my beer, I'm going to get into this," and they draw the best
Mm.
darn pink elephant they've ever drawn. It's not unlike that when we start thinking about in survival mode, what does that mean? In thriving mode, what does that mean? If I'm meeting them where they're at, now I can move them. As Francis Frey says, you can't change a person's behaviors until you change their beliefs. So we need to move people past and get them to behave in a different way by speaking to their beliefs, not to their behaviors, not to the action of that influences those behaviors, but to the beliefs that are underlying in them.
I'm interested to get your thoughts on where you're trying to persuade somebody. So you've identified like where they are. You've made some adjustments there.
Mhm.
How can you make sure that ensure that your approach is perceived as genuine and respectful, authentic, rather than you're trying to manipulate them to get something they clearly want? Like I say this all the time to clients. I say, you don't need to hammer somebody over the head with your pitch of what you're trying to sell. Like people get it. Like you are a service provider or a product provider, like you're trying to sell something. But even internally, like you don't need to hammer like I need this, I need like over the head. They people generally get that. So if you come off as overly flowery in your speech, like you're clearly trying to persuade them to do something, um, then people could have that opposite reaction. They could then be like, I,
Okay.
you're trying just to get me to do this. You don't care about what I just told you about what's going on in my day. So I don't know if you have a way of persuasion that is genuine and respectful.
Well, and I think that's really where it all starts. Christian is exactly right there. In the three-step sales process: connect, collect, and close. In the connection stage is something that most people don't spend the time doing. When you spend more time in the early steps of the process in connecting with your customer, you're going to have infinitely easier time in closing them. And the whole idea of trying to persuade them and trying to sell them something becomes very, very um, almost irrelevant, really. The best processes that I've ever seen are some of the most boring processes you'd ever imagine in a sales process. And it's not because they weren't very, very strategic. It was because they spent the time connecting with customers, finding that common ground. Now, there's a lot of research that proves to us and has shown to us that empathy is the very first thing that a customer or a person or a counter to you is looking for from an exchange. They're looking for empathy first. Always, always, always empathy. Some call it warmth. Empathy is the more common terminology. When they identify empathy first, they see that you are not going to club them over the head in the cave when you guys go to sleep that night. Then they can move on to competence. Are you able to deliver on the things that you're looking to deliver? And these are the two most fundamental components or ingredients of trust. When we've demonstrated empathy and competence, then they've made the decision to allow us to persuade them, right? If we haven't demonstrated those two things, well, how do we demonstrate competence? But through the second stage, the collection stage. In this world, there is only ever three things that we're actually collecting information on: the user themselves, the customer, their comfort needs, their user needs, their what they deem important within this construct, the environment's needs, because the outside environment will influence or affect the solution in some way. In some products or services a lot, in some products and services very little. And then lastly is the solutions needs itself. What are the nuts and bolts of the solutions needs to be able to serve the person at the right level? Not too much, not too little, just right. Well, once we understand that, we're also demonstrating our competence the whole way. We're showing them that we actually care about them. We're asking them questions and investigating it in a very strategic but very poignant way. Again, keeping it super simple. It's always the same three things. If we don't know enough, if we have yet to collect enough information, we should not be diagnosing a solution for them. We should not be saying, this is the thing you should buy. And only when we get to the point where we know that this is the right thing, we can then leverage the words of the customer to demonstrate our persuasive power. It's the customer that feeds us the information to serve them at the highest level, right? And that's how we persuade in an authentic way, because we're actually authentically serving them, right?
Yeah.
We found the thing that's right for them and they do need to buy it. Now, is there things that we need to do tactically to get a person to get out of their own way to buy the thing? Sometimes. I call
Yeah.
those closing arcs. And the closing
Yeah.
arc is a simple tactic that I use that's designed to get a person out of their own way. Agree, rebuttal, close the sale again. Ask for the sale again. Agree, rebuttal, close, and just keep doing that until they do the thing. And only in those situations where you know that you've got the right solution for them.
Yeah. It's so funny. You do this in life where you have like you've got this methodology. You're talking with clients. You go have other conversations, and you hear things like some of the words, some of the phrasing, some of your model. You have different words for it. But in organizations that I've worked with, like I benefited of working about 15 years ago with a company that was very um, tightly aligned sales and marketing. They were really good at that, very transactional software sales, but
Mhm.
just a fantastic sales model where
Hmm.
they knew that, and so that they were prepared with. And there's a way you could do it, is just, again, part of the culture of the organization to know that. What are the pain points? What are the questions being asked? They were very much, and here's the personas. They had five, clearly defined of those roles. And so
Yep.
you'd often walk through and you'd hear in the sales area somebody like, hey, I've got Susan on the phone. It wasn't somebody named Susan, it was that persona. They
Yep.
had names and pictures for the personas, but
Yep.
they knew then where those people were on the journey, the types of questions they were asking, they had the answers there. And I was constantly, getting asked over on the marketing side, like, hey, we're getting more questions around this and we don't have strong answers. Like, how would you respond to this as the product expert, as the industry expert? And so I would help shape the answers, the responses, give them a link, like, this blog post covers this article, to
Right.
show them this. It gives them an answers that. But they were very much in tune with that, to close that out, to make sure that they had those answers. It's really funny that so many of the clients that I talk to, when I say, well, where do you get, like, how are you answering these questions? I say, well, you're capturing the feedback from your employees. You're capturing the questions, the issues, the open tickets with your support system. You see data of how people are reaching your site. They're finding us by asking, querying certain questions. All of that informs you of what people want, what their intent is, what their needs are.
Hmm.
Sometimes what they think their needs are versus what they actually need. And there's some work to be done there. But you've got all of this rich data out there. What are you doing to answer those questions?
Yeah.
And so that's why. And again, I go back to where we kind of started, saying, if you have a framework, a process for having the conversation, structure it so that you're helping define, shape what that is. And this is
Right.
another interpretation of what you said, is like, when you think of going and solving a problem, from a software, from an engineering perspective, you can't solve it if you don't know what it is. Like, you
Right.
can come up with a solution,
Yep.
but I guarantee you it won't be the solution to what they actually need. Like,
Precisely. Yep.
you need to know the scope. You need to understand the problem before you start solving it.
But and to
And it's
that,
true with people.
you're spot on. To that point, there's, for example, there is literally only 7 sales objections that one can come up with, to object to you. Now, those are what I would call first principles. Those are the first principles of objections. Now, they also live in the world of, um, uh, complaints, lies, objections, stalls, excuses, and flat out rejection. But ultimately, all of those things that sound differently are having you deal with the situation one of 7 different ways, full stop, right? And from that, you can put in your pocket 3 to 5 different ways to respond to each one of those 7 buckets. Now, that's 35 different things that you need to know, but be ready instead of getting ready. If you had 35 things that you can say instantly right out of the gate, the moment that you hear that signal that says, "Oh, they have no love for me or the product. They have no money." Perceptually, almost always, but possibly in reality, there is a go-to closing arc that you can go to that immediately pulls out the real information, rebuttals it, and goes for the close again based off of what it is that they're saying. So you're right. There is a finite number of things that you can get incredibly good at. And you see this all the time. Like comedians standing up and doing a 45-minute set. That's all stuff that they memorized and came up with. Every great movie that you've watched, every beautiful speech that you heard, every song that hits the top 40. All of these things are consistent, repeatable products that produce a result, and a feeling, and a reaction that you can control.
I would say with the comedian example, I said, yeah, love listening to set, but sometimes the funniest is the audience work that happens before or after
Huge.
the program set.
And a lot of that
Um,
is practiced, it's no different than, improv. They come up with practice sessions around, going through and brainstorming out, um, how to deal with a situation that they're going to dust out to the crowd. The next game is going to be, things that you say at a wedding, that you should never say at a wedding, that kind of thing. They're going to practice that, and they're going to have a bunch in their back pocket ready to go, so that when that comes up, it feels very organic, but it's actually happening with a lot more structure than we imagine.
I've got to close things out. I've got a couple more questions for you. One is, so this is one was one of the first questions I wrote down when I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah.
Thinking again from a sales centric organization, but this is a when I think of persuasive communication, persuasive conversation. Trying to like the biggest problem that I have sometimes is getting the person I'm communicating to or with to have the same level of urgency that that I need them to have on this. Um, how do you have techniques for creating urgency without making the other person, your audience, feel pressured?
Yeah. So, I mean, this comes back down to a question of ethics to a certain degree, and intent, right? Creating an urgency comes from identifying the actual pain and then agitating that pain, right? Urgency is going to come from a feeling in your body. Urgency is going to come from that pit of your stomach that goes, "Oh, this doesn't feel good," or "This makes me feel bad," or "This is a resonance thing. This is a vibrational thing. This is all coming from a chemistry, right, of our brain." And it's all about identifying where the true pain lies and tugging on those strings of the true pain, again, ethically and with the proper of intentions. But if we skip the steps in the front end of this, if we skip the steps of finding common ground and demonstrating our empathy, and then demonstrating our competency by really, really learning what their pains are, we're very often not pulling on the right pains. We think we are. I have heard it
Mm.
thousands and thousands of times. I watch these salespeople. I listen to them. I listen to them on the phones. We're reviewing things. I hear them in real time. And it's excruciating how little they've actually listened or asked enough questions to get to the root problems of pain. And
Mm.
and they don't have the mechanisms or the ammunition to tug on the things in the way that they need to tug on the things. And that's a responsibility as leaders that we have for our employees and our people that we're trying to do that, and for ourselves. If we haven't done the work, we shouldn't have any expectation of being successful. Don't be disappointed with the results you don't get from the work you didn't do, right? You have to do the work, and the work is understanding what are the 5, 6, 7 big things that a person has a problem with in plumbing, right? Because
Mm.
there might be 1,000 different ways that they say it, but there's only like 6 things to really focus on. And if
Yeah.
we just got it to the simplest of points, find the things you can
Well, I think
cope.
that that's why, like, in our persona development, again, going back to this model and multiple companies that have done something
Yep.
similar to this, where we know, like to your point, it's going to be a finite number, depending on your product or your service, but
Yep.
a
Exactly.
finite number of pain points for that.
Yep.
And so it's important. And I would talk to clients. I'm saying, okay, have you outlined what for this service? What are the top 5, 7 pain points you solve? Like, we've never really thought of that. I'm like, You're kidding. Like, but
Right.
have you sold anything to this point if you don't understand they're solving a problem? Why would I otherwise buy whatever you're selling
Right.
if there's not a pain? And
Right.
stop anybody from writing notes in or commentary on the video. I realize that sometimes you build things and knowing that there's value there, and then you go searching for a problem for the thing that you built. But for the vast majority of things, it's the other way around. We've identified a problem, we've created a product or service to solve that problem.
The
Um,
bigger the problem you solve, the more money you'll get paid. The quicker you can take away pain. Almost everything that we do and anything that we sell to corporations or the general public are about pain relief. What
yeah.
pain are we alleviating? Even when we're selling Lululemon pants, we're selling pain relief, and that pain relief is I'm a better person. I look fabulous in these pants, and I feel better about myself. I've elevated my both my internal status of my self worth, and the status of those around me who are looking at now my fabulous ass.
I, I like the phrasing there. No, in working, I work in the IT side of things, and it's why so much of the language, which is exactly this point, is around risk assessment. And you think of like right now, some of the um, the top selling, the fastest growing companies are in like the cybersecurity space because there's risk out there. Most organizations, if they've not yet been breached or felt pain somewhere around that, they will. Everyone will go through it. It's just, and unfortunately, it's one of those areas where most companies don't do anything about it until they've experienced the pain, and then they take the steps. And then it's just about reducing the cost of the pain versus,
Right.
nobody wants to pay for proactive your preventive measures, which is just sad. But no,
It's
I
a
was gonna earlier on too. I think you'll like this. So this prior company, talking about not feeling like you're pressuring people. We had a phrase for this for salespeople that were really good at being persuasive without being a jerk. We called it being charismatically aggressive in those conversations. If you think about it, people that were good at it, persuasive, they were charismatic, aggressive, but charismatic. People are okay with it. People that weren't as successful, that weren't as good as persuasive, they just came off as a-holes,
sure, yeah,
just jerks,
and there
and
and there
it's
is a
finding that line. Yeah.
there's a huge thing. The challenger sales system, which is a whole sales model that's existed for 20 plus years, is about um, courteously challenging the notions of people around a specific thing. Why do you like that particular brand? Why do you, and just being like a toddler and asking why, in that very empathetic, kind way to kind of tug out of them what it is that actually matters to them. The more we can have the customer telling us, the more we're going to pull that lever to go, what if if we just set that aside for a moment and said there's a new product that's made by the same manufacturer under a different name that does the same thing. And I'm just making up a scenario here, of course, but at the end of the day, now the customer is willing to change their behavior because you've shifted their belief. So it all comes down to that. If I'm going to get a customer to do a thing, focus on their beliefs. Don't focus on the product that you sell. The belief is going to orient around what is my pain that I'm trying to get away. And no one's ever going to feel as though they're being pressured when you're trying to solve their problem. They feel the pressure when you don't have an arsenal of vocabulary and phrases and lines and solutions that's congruent with their true pain, right? If they actually feel a certain way, but you haven't got to the root cause yet, you're really just dealing with symptomatic pain, not root pain, then
Mhm.
you're not actually doing anything. You're just slapping band-aids on and hoping that that's going to get rid of the cancer. Well, you've got to get to the root of this before you're actually going to get the sale. And that's why that collection stage is so critical in asking all the questions is from a number of different angles of approach so that the customer does see that you're not only competent but empathetic to their pain relief, that you are trying to make them feel better in this scenario, whatever that scenario might be.
Yeah, we refer to it as that discovery phase.
Yeah.
It is so important to do that. And you think of, that goes back. I started, my first salaried position 35 years ago was a runner for a law firm. So I was the guy that was the young guy, 19-year-old. I would drive down, file the paperwork. So I learned that whole around about a lot of the legal process and that discovery, which sets up so many conversations, your strategy down the way. If you don't have that level of understanding, if you don't have that comprehensive view, you're not going to know which questions to ask. You're not going to know that approach. It goes back to where we started as the personality types internally. If when I get to know the individuals, and I will adjust my communication strategy and treat my direct reports. Everybody's equal, kind of like that's not what I mean. My delivery of communications, how I work with them. I know that what they need more or less of. Some people need a stronger hand, other need a softer approach to that, like things like that.
Yep.
You can't you can't treat everybody the same. It's like you can't treat every customer exactly the same.
Well,
Uh,
that's what boils down into two big buckets for me. One is understanding those 10 elements of motivation, because when we understand how to tug a person externally and internally, how to drive those internal motivators, then we can absolutely influence them better, right? The second one is the empowering stage. When I have a vision for my company, my department, my personal success, and so does the employee. We also have purpose. We also have mission. We also have all of these things that are misused in the industry, uh, where we're trying to get internal motivators externalized, and to get people bought into our purpose. Nobody is going to follow your purpose. They're going to follow their purpose, right? It's an internally triggered motivator. So let's stop trying to get people to follow our purpose, and instead make our purpose to have them want to follow us through their purpose. It's a subtle shift in what we're thinking and how we're approaching it. But when we start to realize the difference between the internal and the externals, now we can empower people, but we can also give them that ability to fulfill themselves. And that's where the culture side of this equation becomes so crucial in us actually having a solution where people are bought in and influenced and persuaded to move this whole thing forward with us, be it the family, be it the business, be it the community that we're in.
yeah, excellent, Ryan. Really appreciate your insights on the topic, and I know that I've got links out to various social channels and ways of finding you. Of course, it's in the profile out on YouTube, and out on the YouTube, on the blog, and of course out on the podcast. But Ryan, really appreciate your time today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for you.
You've been listening to the CollabTalk Podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.